Hey guys, welcome to another video. I'm going to try and keep it brief. For this video we are talking about Arthur Clarke's The Ghost from the Grand Banks, and this was a really difficult book to read. I generally devour like sci-fi novels and things like that, but and this one's not even really. It's about, I think, 200 and something pages. 230 pages, and this thing took me almost a year to read. The story is, well, it's not very likely, let's put it that way. To quote the back of the book, well, no, you know what, I'm not going to quote the back of the book. The basic story is that there is an attempt being made to raise the HMS Titanic from the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It's 2010. They've got 2 years before the centennial of the sinking of the Titanic, and they want to lift it up out of the ocean and commemorate it, make it like a monument in a museum or something like that. I can't remember the exact details. Beyond the premise, I really can't really tell you much about the book. But I mean, I like the concept. It's not that far-fetched, I have to admit. The way it's explained in the book, you honestly think that yes, you know, they can do it, but you know, ultimately, you know, you are kind of skeptical throughout. So it's basically two teams that are competing to see who gets to do it. Who will actually get the chance to lift the Titanic, and will they succeed? That's the basic gist of the story. In terms of what I liked, as I've just said, I liked the concept. I've seen a lot of documentaries on the HMS Titanic. I've seen James Cameron's movie, and I've seen a couple of like mini-series and things like that. But so I've seen a lot of coverage on this. I read a lot of stuff on the Titanic, and so this book really kind of interested me in that it approaches this idea of, okay, how would we go about lifting this ship, you know, which at the time of its construction was the largest thing ever built, if I remember correctly, from, you know, 4 kilometers under the Atlantic Ocean. Unfortunately, the premise is basically, I think, all I really liked. Everything is explained, so it makes sense, and the characters are more or less likable, so you do kind of root for them. But at the same time, this is such a nightmare to read. It's just a mess in terms of pacing. And there's a whole section on here that is dedicated to the colors of infinity, and you've got all of this stuff on on the Colors of Infinity, and it takes up, if I remember correctly, that took up the bulk of, I think, 2 or 3 chapters in this book, where they just rattle off numbers and explanations and all kinds of crazy stuff. And they talk about, quadratic equations, and you've got first loop, second loop, fourth loop, and so on. And every loop is a different solution, and it's very complicated. It bogs down the whole story, at least as far as I'm concerned. It's not a bad book, okay? In addition to the Colors of Infinity, which you'd have to be a serious math geek to enjoy, it's just such a nightmare in terms of pacing in general. There is a huge portion of this book that is just gibberish. Nothing happens. The first couple of chapters are spent talking about the situation and discussing, how all of these things came together and what each person does for a living and who they are in the story. And I understand why it was done, but at the same time, it really does slow the story. And I'm going to repeat myself again, it's not a bad book, but the whole Colors of Infinity thing didn't make any sense to me. And unless you're an extreme math geek or a huge fan of crazy mathematical numbers, the average Joe just won't get it. There's a whole appendix in the back of the book that lasts about, what is it, 244, 6, about a 9-page appendix talking about the Colors of Infinity and the different mathematical uses and things like that. I've read that appendix half a dozen times and I still can't make sense of it. So yeah, that whole section just kind of irritated me. The politicking, the discussions that go on about who gets to raise the ship, which team or which set of ideas will we use. Oh my word, there are so many. There are chapters upon chapters upon chapters of people sitting around a table talking about who should get to raise the ship and why. And it's just irritating. On the whole, it's not necessarily a bad book, as I've already said a couple of times. It's an enjoyable read, but it does require one heck of a lot. It just requires so much patience to get through. And I found myself looking at this book again. The most common question that you tend to ask yourself is, would I recommend this to someone? And a couple of years ago, I probably would have said yes. If you're into this kind of thing, go ahead, check it out. And I stand by that. But at the moment, looking back on this, I don't know if I would recommend this to just anybody. I think you'd kind of have to be a hardcore Arthur Clarke fan just to like get through this book was a nightmare. But it's an enjoyable read. It's not for everybody. I mean, hell, I spent most of this book going and thinking, just please let something happen. Anything, I don't care. I don't care if it's a glass, like a wine glass that falls and breaks. Just let something happen. And I spent most of the book thinking, oh well, I'll just skip this chapter. And it was like that when I first read this as well. I found myself fighting the temptation to skip whole sections of this book just to see if this was actually going to go anywhere. I mean, as an introduction to Arthur Clarke's books, this was probably not the best book to start with. I probably should have started with something a little bit shorter, a little bit lighter, just to get a feel for Arthur Clarke's books. And if you've never read Clarke's work before, I would recommend that you do that, rather than throw yourself headlong into a book and then sit there smacking yourself over the head trying to figure out what he was talking about in each chapter. On the other hand, if you're heavily into Clarke's books and you haven't read this yet, give it a shot. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. But yeah, I probably wouldn't recommend this to someone who's never read Arthur Clarke's books before. It's just that slow and that heavy. Clarke puts one hell of a lot of detail into his work. Every detail on the machinery is described so that you know exactly what it does. And I mean, the first time around it's fun because you get to see, oh well, this machine works like this. After a couple of times though, the novelty wears off, so yeah, if you're not into this kind of thing, maybe find something else. If you're curious about Arthur Clarke's books, find something lighter first. He did a couple of short stories. Retreat from Earth is pretty good. Travel by Wire is pretty good. I think he did one called How We Went to Mars, which was also really good. So maybe find those and read those first, just so that you get a feel for the guy. And then pick out a book or two. Maybe go to the local library and loan a copy of one of his books. Better to do that than to spend $150 or $200 on a book that you read, hate, and then never read again. I personally found the book to be a tedious but enjoyable read. And yeah, I mean, in spite of its flaws, it was a fun read, and you definitely get a feeling that things work. You also kind of get this whole the immensity of what they're doing is kind of outlined perfectly as well. So overall, would I recommend it? Probably not, unless you're really into Clarke's books. I enjoyed it. Not for everyone, obviously, but and I'm just repeating myself and stumbling over my words now, so I'm gonna sign off. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I have just finished the next book for the January review lineup, which is The Death of Sleep. So I will be doing a video on that next. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye.